Hi, my name is Henry from Civil Software Civil Series. We're going to continue our lesson on how to make structural model with our software. Okay. The next I will want to show you how you can reconfigure the beam arrangement, to actually represent what you have. Remember, as I said earlier, the software uses the panel arrangement, which is the first thing we did. To create the beam arrangement. First of all, it creates the beam span, and then later it creates the beam. Okay, so I mean it's intelligent enough to know where your beam are supposed to be. Okay, but you have to also remember that sometimes you might wish to reconfigure the beam arrangement, because we usually regard the beam positions created or the beam spans created as possible beam positions. Okay, you the engineer, you have the final say on how the beam position has to be. Okay, what is generated by the software we usually regard as generated or predicted beam positions, but it's left for you to remodel the beam position to be exactly the way you want them to be and where you want them to be. Okay, so far we have seen very simple arrangement and very simple model. Okay, I will try to make the model a little bit more complicated. Okay, then I will show you how you can really make sure you are in charge. Now, before we even do that, I want you to know some things. Now, the orange line, if you notice, I unchecked. If this is the beam lines are in cyan, and the beam span are in orange lines. Now, before you can reconfigure the beam span and the beam, I think at this juncture, at this point, I will try to explain, what happens, how the beams are arranged, and what actually are the beam spans. Okay, so I'll take time to talk about that. Now, if you notice, the orange lines usually starts from one point to the other. Okay, if you select a particular beam span, okay, you'll be able to see the geometry of the beam span. Or better still, you can go to modeling and click on beam properties. Now, when you click on beam properties, you will actually see the property of the beam. First of all, we have the beam span collection. The beam sample collection kind of shows you all the beam span that are in the floor. Okay, now beams are made up of beam spans. Okay, now throughout the software, the beam span are the cornerstone in which the software is built up. I mean, it's kind of the backbone. Okay, it's very good that you are in control of your beam span. You know where they are. I mean, what you are seeing is what you want. Okay, we always advise, it's very good you reconfigure the beam span if necessary. In most cases you might not need to do that, but in some complicated design you might need to work around the beam span to make them exactly how you want them to be. Okay, now one thing you need to know, if you go to the beam properties, the software will show you the beam span collections, and then you have the beam collection. Usually the beam is made up of individual beam span. A very good example, this is my beam 1 starting from here to here, and this my beam 1 is actually made up of individual beam spans. You can see I have span 1, span 2, and span 3. Okay, so the beam collection kind of put the whole beam spans, all the individual beam span, to the beams where they belong. Okay, so you have beam 1, you have 3 span, and then so it is very, very important you have a handle on the beam span. Okay, once the beam spans are okay, I mean you are good to go. Okay, now look at the particular beam span. As I said before, you can either click on the beam span. If you want to see only the beam span, you can go to view and uncheck. By default, the beam is checked. If you uncheck it, okay, the software will show you only the beam span. But if you want to see the beam, just click on this. Now, if you look at the individual beam span, let me select this span 1. Okay, you can see I have geometry. I have the start X, start point X, and start point Y. Okay, this is very important. The start point X usually starts for a horizontal beam. It starts it's at the left hand side of the horizontal beam, and the end point is at the right hand side. Okay, now for a vertical beam, the start point are usually on top, and the end point is below. Okay, so you can see, as I said before, a horizontal beam span. Okay, we have the start point X, start point Y that define the start point of the beam span, and then we have the end point X and the end point Y that define the end point of the beam span. Okay, so that means you can actually manipulate the start point and the end point, but bear in mind, for a horizontal beam you just have to manipulate the start X and the end X. Okay, for a vertical beam you can manipulate the start Y and the end Y. Okay, so that is the way it is oriented. It's very good you note this down. And I also said something before, that for a horizontal beam span, you can see the selected is a horizontal beam span. A horizontal beam span is a beam span that lies on the x-axis. For a horizontal beam span, the start point is usually at the left hand side of the beam span, and the end point is usually at the right hand side of the beam span. Okay, this is very important. The start point is at the left hand side of the beam span, and the end point is at the right hand side of the beam span. So the measurement usually starts from left to right. Okay, now for a vertical beam span, this is a vertical beam span selected. A vertical beam span usually starts from the top and move towards the bottom. You can see the start point is at the top and the end point is at the bottom part of the beam span. So it's good you know this, because this will enable you to, because the next stage we'll be going into, I will show you how you can modify the coordinate of the beam span. Okay, so that it will actually be what you want it to be. Now let me show you another thing. Assume for instance I want to introduce a beam span at this point, or let's say this my span tray is not as long as it is, it's not as wide as it is. Let's assume that the width of the span is 2500. Okay, so we have it here, and then I add another panel. I can just select this panel and then copy to the right, then select the other panel and then make the width to be 15. So I have two panels. Okay, now if I go back and say create beam span, and as I said earlier, the changes you made in a particular floor does not affect the other floors. You can see we're in floor 1. In first floor, you can see my roof is as it were before, and my ground floor is as it were before. Okay, so now in this case, now we have a beam generated this way. I can also create new beam. Okay, now let me also say this, which is very important. Each time that you change the configuration of the beam span, as I said, the beam span are kind of the building block for the beam. Okay, each time you change the configuration of the beam span, it's always very, very important you go back and create new beam. Okay, it's very, very important. Just a click, it will do the magic. Okay, it will do that all. Now you can now see that I have this span introduced, but again I have another span here and another span here. Take on this, I have another span here and another span here. Okay, now let's assume for instance that you want this beam span to stay here. For instance, you want this beam span to transmit a point load on this beam here. That means I want this new beam I want this beam span to introduce a point load on a beam span from here to here. You can see for now we have two beam spans here. Number one, you will want to have only one beam span starting from here all the way to here, and number two, you want this span to introduce a point load on this long span. Okay, so the first thing now is to reconfigure the beam span. That is where the work is. Okay, and to reconfigure the beam span, it's quite very simple, just knowing the orientation of the beam span. Now if you click on this particular beam span, now the best way to do it, number one, I will just delete off this. Okay, I don't need that span. Then I can stretch this. All I need to do to stretch it is to change the orientation, the endpoint X. You can see it will now be at 14,000. Okay, then just change it to 14,000. So that's it, you have it. The beam span will just reconfigure, it will just change. And then similar thing happens here. I will delete this off, and then I will stretch this. Just change this to 14,000. That is why I said it's very, very important you understand the orientation of the beam span. The start point is always at the beginning, and the end point are always at the left for horizontal beam span, and the end point is at the right. For a vertical beam span, the start point is on top and the end point is below or bottom. Okay, now you can see I have deleted the previous beam span that are there. Okay, and I have stretched them. Okay, just by changing the endpoint X, and it will expand. Now the next thing now is to now tell the software that this beam span is going to transmit point load on this span. Let me repeat, this span is going to transmit point load on this span. Okay, and the only way you can do that is you select the span, this particular vertical span, and then you go and change the support type. You can see by default the support types are column support, but in this case we want it to want the support type to be primary beam support. Making it primary beam support means that this vertical beam is being supported by this horizontal beam. Okay, that is what it means to make the end vertical, to make the end primary beam support. Okay, now in the same way I also say that this end, the end support type is primary beam support. I'm just saying that this vertical beam span is being supported by this horizontal beam span. Okay, so that is it. And once you have done that, the software will take that into note. When you analyze and design, for instance, it will transmit the forces accordingly. Okay, now as I said, each time you manipulate the beam span, you have to always go and create new beam. So in this case, just a single click on create new beam we reconfigure the beam arrangement. Okay, let me just quickly show you what we have done. To check through what you have done to make sure that the beam spans are the way you want them to be, I'll just click on the beam properties. Okay, just close this up, click on the beam properties. Sometimes the beam properties might have been minimized. As you can see, it was minimized before. If you click here again, it won't come up, so you just have to bring up the one that was minimized, close it so it can refresh itself. Okay, so and open it again. Now if you check, if I go through my, first of all, the first thing you do when you bring up the beam properties is to check through your beam spans to make sure the beam spans are where you want them to be. You can see my beam span 1. As you are going through the beam span collection, you can see the beam spans are being shaded in orange. Okay, now look at my beam span 6. You can see clearly that that is what I wanted. It's showing from here all the way to here, which is what I wanted. Okay, based on the work we have done. Now as you navigate through, you can see this one too is how I want it. and that's it. And then you now check the beams. You can see my beam 1. The very important thing to also check when you are navigating through the beams is when you select a particular beam, then software will show you the number of spans that made up that beam. You can see in this case it's showing us span 1, span 2, and span 3 as against the original 4 spans that we have before. So you can quickly navigate to make sure the spans are actually the way you want them to be, and of course the beams are where you want them to be. And once you have done that, you are good to go. Everything is okay. Okay, I can close this. Now, before we move further, let me take this back the way it was before. I will say create new beam span and create new beam. And now let me also assume that originally I have also created my column, and these columns are here. Okay, I'm trying to take your mind back to what I've just said earlier. Now, if I want to reconfigure this arrangement so that I want a beam span to run from here all the way to here and not the way it is right now, you can see I have 2 beam spans. Okay, but I want it to run all the way from here to here, and I want these 2 to run from here to here. Okay, now the first thing you do, first of all, I can just uncheck show beam so that I'll be seeing the beam spans. As I said earlier, the beam spans are shown in orange while the beam are shown in cyan. It's kind of light blue, the other color you saw before. Okay, fine, you can see I have these spans. Okay, now the only way to do that is to manipulate the spans. That is why I call to reconfigure the beam spans. Okay, now to reconfigure the beam spans, all I need to do is I will delete this beam span. I don't need it. Then I will now take this, but it's always good. I have to take this back the way it was before. It's always good before you delete a beam span, because the idea is that I want this beam span to reach here. To make it faster for myself, I always note where these beam spans, the end of this beam span, you can see it's 14,000. If you like, you can even copy it before you delete the beam span. So I will delete off this beam span and I will extend this. It's 14,000. You can see it have extended. I will also delete off this beam span and I will extend this. You can see it's extended. Then I will tell the software that this vertical beam span is being supported by this beam. That means this horizontal beam span, remember I'm using beam span, this horizontal beam span is the primary support for this vertical beam span. Sorry, this is the vertical beam span. Okay, then all I need to do to tell the software that I'll have to change the support type for the vertical beam span. The start support type is primary beam. Sorry, just make it primary beam support, and the end support type is primary beam support. That will show the software that is actually being supported by this. So by so doing, we have changed this. This is this is primary beam support, and this is primary beam support. So by so doing, we have let the software to know that this beam span is being supported by this horizontal beam span. So that's just it. You can see in this exercise I've been able to reconfigure the beam span, and I have been able to also tell the software that this particular beam span is being supported by the other one. Okay, so it's quite that simple and very straightforward. Okay, so you can really actually reconfigure the beam span and manipulate it however you want it to be. Okay, just to make it easier and in conformity with what you are modeling. And once you are done with that, and that's it, I mean everything is okay and good and fine. If I put it up in 3D, so you can see So that is it here. You can see this. Let me show the beam. Cool. So you can see this beam here, and you can see underneath there is no column. Okay, I can actually remove the grid lines to become clearer. So you can see this beam here, and you can see underneath there is no column, but rather it's being supported by this. So that is the basic way that you can actually manipulate your arrangement. And once you do that, the software respects your decision and everything is the way you want them to be. No matter how complex the arrangement is, in this simple, easy way, you can really reconfigure. Now, let me also say this. It's true that you can click on a column, okay, for instance, and delete the column, but we don't usually advise that, because we just want people to be in control of the beam span. The software generates this beam span in a click, but we always advise it's good that you know your beam spans. Always take time going through the properties of each of the floor to verify that the beams are the way you want them to be, with the required number of span as you want them, and not just after going through the beams. Okay, then also make sure you go through the beam spans, but first of all go through the beam spans to make the beam spans are how you want them to be, and after that you can go through your beam. Okay, and remember I said once you manipulate the beam span, you can have to always click on create new beam. You can click on create new beam as many times as you want. It doesn't make any difference. Okay, what it does is just to put together all the recent changes you have made in your beam span, because actually the beams are made up of the beam spans. Okay, so that is it. That is how you can manipulate your beam span. I hope you have enjoyed it. Thank you.